Hey, everybody.
John Green, welcome to Penn.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with all y'all.
You think that now, but we'll see how you feel in an hour.
I feel very confident that these people seem nice, and I bet they submitted great questions. I'm worried about you, but no, it'll be great.
What are you worried about?
Oh, I always worry a little bit when I get interviewed by you because you're a very good interviewer, and then you have to be a little more careful when someone's a good interviewer.
Do you want me to be a bad interviewer?
No. I do prefer a good interview, but you are unusually good, for sure.
That's a lot of pressure now. Thanks, John Green.
You're welcome.
For lowering the stakes here. So I'd love to just get a sense of the audience. How many of you are nerd fighters here? All right, crash coursers?
Wow.
There it is, that's what I thought. Vlog Brothers fans? Following John smacking down Big Pharma fans? Okay. What did I miss? Fault in Our Stars?
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you all.
What did I miss, John?
How
many identities do you have?
No, that's it. That covers it. That's all the big stuff.
I find it mildly annoying that you're able to do all of these jobs better than people who do them full time.
It's nice of you to say. It does not feel that way from the inside. It definitely feels like I'm spinning a lot of plates, and many of them fall and crash, and I just do my best.
Well, we'll try not to drop any today.
Okay.
So I have to tell you, I was deeply ambivalent about this book. Deeply ambivalent when I saw it. Because I would not normally read a book about tuberculosis.
Right.
But I would normally read a book by John Green.
That was my hope, is that I could force you into reading a book about tuberculosis.
Well, it worked, and dare I say, it was a page-turner.
Thank you. That was my hope.
I was kind of shocked, but I thought it was beautifully written. Obviously, the topic could not be more important, although I didn't realize the importance of it until I read your words. But it was also arresting and motivating in a way that I think is really unusual for a book. So why? Why did you force us to read about tuberculosis?
Well, to me, tuberculosis is the exemplary disease of injustice. I mean, I also could have written about malaria or HIV or diabetes or cancer. You know, if you look at a map of my hometown of Indianapolis and you look at the map of poverty and you look at the map of cancer rates, it's the same map. And so there are lots of diseases I could have written about. But to me, tuberculosis is the exemplary disease of injustice because we know so little about it and we talk so little about it. I mean, this is the deadliest infectious disease in the world, and yet I didn't know that. I think most people don't know that. And that speaks to tuberculosis's long history of kind of being neglected.
I had no idea, frankly, any of the history that you covered in the book, and it was sort of horrifying to learn how many times do we have to go through figuring out that we can cure this before we actually make the cure available everywhere.
Apparently, we have to go through it at least one more time.
Devastating. Tell me about what got you interested in tuberculosis, because I think the personal connection to this story was really moving.
Yeah, so it's one thing to say 1.25 million people die of a disease, but if you don't, every year, which is the case with tuberculosis, but if you don't know anyone with tuberculosis, then you're kind of multiplying 1.25 million by 0, and it's hard to understand what that means. But I'm able to multiply 1.25 million by several, and one of the reasons, let me start that over, Adam. I don't like my answer.
You can't self-edit during a live interview.
I'm self-editing the podcast. I'm self-editing the live interview. It's happening right now. You're watching it occur. The short answer, which is how I'm going to answer the question. I met a kid with tuberculosis at a tuberculosis hospital in Sierra Leone. And when I got to that tuberculosis hospital, I didn't even know there were tuberculosis hospitals. I thought tuberculosis hospitals were a phenomenon of the 1910s, you know? And so we visit this tuberculosis hospital, and there's this little kid, and his name is Henry, which is my son's name. And he looked to be about the same age as my son, who was 9 at the time. And Henry walked me all around this tuberculosis hospital, and he showed me the wards, and he showed me the laboratory, and he showed me the kitchen where they made food. And I figured he must be somebody's kid, like a doctor or a nurse or something. Finally, we made our way back to the doctors who were kind of gathering together talking about cases, and they sort of shooed Henry away in a very loving manner. He was sort of like the mayor of that hospital. Like everywhere he went, like people would greet him and say like, "Oh, Henry, it's great to see you." And I said, whose kid is that? And they said, he's a patient, and he's one of the patients we're really concerned about because we know his tuberculosis is not responding well enough to the antibiotics. So even though he was relatively healthy and able to walk around, they could tell that his tuberculosis was inevitably going to come roaring back, and that when it did, they wouldn't have any tools in a country like Sierra Leone to help him. One doctor told me that's the point at which you put the stethoscope down. And they also told me that Henry wasn't 9, he was 17. He'd just been so emaciated by, first by malnutrition and then by TB that he looked much younger. And it was really in following Henry's story and learning more about Henry, especially after I reunited with him in 2023, that I wanted to write this book. The book would have been impossible without Henry's generosity and that of his mother, Isatu, and really they're the reasons the book exists.
Well, I think you've given him a way to help a ton of people. And his story in the book, I think, really brings the disease to life in a way that would have been hard to understand otherwise. I think one of the things that I felt was a tremendous amount of moral outrage reading this book, because it just seems wrong that over 1 million people are going to die of this disease, and we know exactly what we need to do to save them, and it's not happening. Why not?
Well, this great Ugandan doctor, Dr. Peter Mujeni, said once of HIV/AIDS drugs, where are the drugs? The drugs are where the disease is not, and where is the disease? The disease is where the drugs are not. And that's very much the case with tuberculosis. We have really good tools for curing tuberculosis. Now, it's not easy to cure. It's a bacterial infection, but it's not like getting strep throat or something. You have to take antibiotics, a combination of antibiotics every day for 4 or maybe 6 months. If you have drug-resistant tuberculosis, that can be much longer, 12 or 18 months. My friend Henry took over 20,000 pills over the course of his treatment over many years while he was being treated for tuberculosis. So it's not an easy disease to cure, but it is very curable. And the reason is that it's seen as expensive is one reason. It's viewed as expensive, but it's not expensive. Like, my brother had cancer a couple years ago, as you know, Adam, and it cost about 150 times more to cure my brother's cancer than it cost to cure Henry's tuberculosis. And at no point did anyone say to my brother, I'm just not sure this is cost effective. We have a better use of resources. This money would be better going toward prevention. Nobody said that to my brother. They offered him the kind of personalized, tailored treatment that all of us would expect and that all of us deserve. And so I think about that a lot in the context of tuberculosis survivors, because it's a similarly hard disease to cure in the sense that it takes months of treatment, just like my brother's cancer did, but it's very curable. And the short answer to why we don't cure it is that we simply have systems that don't value all human lives equally.
So what do we do about that? I think you came down in 2 places on cost-benefit analysis in this book. I thought well, let's start with, you gave us a very compelling benefits outweigh the costs calculation.
Benefits so outweigh the cost, y'all. It's incredible. I mean, look, 100 years ago, when my great uncle died of tuberculosis in a sanatorium in North Carolina, we spent a tremendous amount of money on tuberculosis in the United States. There were almost as many hospital beds at the peak of the tuberculosis crisis in the US for tuberculosis patients as there were for all other healthcare conditions combined. And now we spend much, much less money on tuberculosis, so little that you probably don't even know about the money we spend on tuberculosis because it's a rounding error in our public health budgets. And that is because we invested in the cure. This isn't like a chronic disease. We know how to cure it. We know how to eradicate it. We know how to end it as a human problem. And the fact that we don't do that means that we end up spending lots and lots of money. Now, it would cost $25 billion a year for about 10 years to eradicate tuberculosis, which is a lot of money, more than I have. More, just looking at the faces in this room, I think very few of you probably have $25 billion, although if you do, please contact me. Have I got a disease for you to eradicate? But as a species, we have those resources. We have those resources in abundance, frankly. And so what drives me absolutely bonkers is knowing that we have the ability to confront this disease and that we choose not to. Like, classically, tuberculosis is correctly known as a bacterial infection that's caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. But in the 21st century, this is a disease we've known how to cure since the 1950s. So in the 21st century, we have to grapple with the reality that the real cause of tuberculosis is not that bacterium, it's us. We know how to kill that bacterium, and yet we choose to live in a world where it continues to be such a scourge.
You have taken matters into your own hands. I've watched you taking on pharma using your megaphone. What has worked? What have you learned?
Well, pharmaceutical companies aren't evil, and the people who work at them aren't evil. That's the first thing I've learned. Like, this is the wrong way to imagine pharmaceutical companies. The people who work at them are nice people and good people who want to get new and better treatments to more people. But some of the systems that they work under really prioritize maximizing profit, right? And so we end up in this very strange situation where coming up with a drug that lengthens your eyelashes is much more valuable than coming up with a drug that treats tuberculosis.
I'm sorry, is that a drug?
Yeah. It actually is a drug that...
Why do you know this?
Because it treats malaria. And then they noticed that these people on this malaria treatment would have these beautiful long lashes. And so they were like, we should totally repurpose this drug and make it incredibly profitable. And they did. I think it's called Latisse, which is a very, very brand name drug, you know? Like, I'm always fascinated by the process that they go through in naming their drugs, you know? Like, Wegovy. I would have loved to be in that meeting where they were like, Dugovy? Mugovy? Wugovy. Wugovy. So what I've learned is that because these systems require these companies to try to maximize profit, a lot of times there's a misalignment between the needs of human health and the needs of the market. And those are the places where we have to come in as groups of individuals and pressure those companies to at least make those drugs and those diagnostic tests and those tools available in impoverished communities at cost or near cost. And that isn't a huge inconvenience to those companies. I'll be frank with you. Johnson & Johnson does not need bedaquiline, which is this incredibly powerful tuberculosis drug. They don't need bedaquiline in order to take your medicine. That's when mine goes off. To tell me to take my medicine. Johnson & Johnson doesn't need bedaquiline in order to be profitable. And so eventually, under pressure, they did abandon all of their secondary patents on bedaquiline. And so now this incredibly powerful TB drug has gone from being way too expensive to seeing its price drop by 55% in just 2 years because now there's generic competition.
Okay, so obviously private sector is one place to go. You also make a case, though, that public investment is necessary.
It's hugely important. I mean, the 1/2 of 1 penny per tax dollar that we were spending on foreign aid until about 8 weeks ago was, I think, the best investment that the American people made. America has traditionally been the most generous donor in the fight against tuberculosis. The United States expresses its power partly through its generosity. That's been the case for centuries, really. And there is no replacing public investment. So what's happened in the last few weeks is we've seen the dispersal of tuberculosis treatments essentially grind to a halt. Not in every country, but in many countries. So that hundreds of thousands of people have seen their treatment interrupted mid-course. Like I said earlier, it takes 4 to 6 months of antibiotics to cure this disease, but if you interrupt your treatment in the middle of those 4 to 6 months, it's catastrophic. Even if you only interrupt it for a couple weeks, it means a skyrocketing risk of developing drug resistance. If you have drug-resistant TB, it means a skyrocketing risk of developing further drug resistance, which is a catastrophe not only for that individual who is very likely to die. I mean, the vast majority of people who've seen their treatment interrupted by the USAID defunding stockouts will die. That is a catastrophe. but it is also a societal catastrophe because it means much more drug-resistant tuberculosis circulating in communities that's harder to treat, and it also risks the great terror of us all, which is a version of tuberculosis that we have no tools to address, which would take us right back to the 1910s and 1930s when my great-uncle died.
So John, given that scenario, it seems like private investment is an important Band-Aid, at least. I guess when I see you, sort of going after a company on social media, my first thought is you've done this so often and so effectively now that do you even need the megaphone? Can you just reach out to the CEO and say, I would really hate to create a PR crisis. Like, can you just fix this now?
Oh, I do that.
And how does it work compared to the public approach?
I mean, I much prefer a private approach. I do not enjoy publicly naming and shaming anyone or anything. It's super uncomfortable for me. I'm not a confrontational person. I've had, my brother and I have worked together for 20 years. We've had one argument in those 20 years. I can't have an argument. I can't. It's very difficult for me to be confrontational, so I find it wildly unpleasant to confront the most powerful corporations in the world. I would much rather have a private conversation with them. And I try to have those private conversations every time, or offer to have those private conversations, and I say, I think we both don't want this. And it can be very effective. I think a lot can happen in private, and we've seen some meaningful change in the world of tuberculosis tools when it comes to private conversations, but sometimes it has to become public.
I may not be the only person in the room wondering what was the fight with Hank.
Oh, it was during the first VidCon. My brother and I started a YouTube conference, and some screen wasn't working properly, and I said, Hank, the screen isn't working properly, and he said, I know. And I said, you need to fix it, and he said, stop looking at me that way. And I said, I don't know where else to put my eyes. And that was it. We didn't talk for 6 hours. And then I was like, I didn't know where to put my eyes. And he was like, I get it, man, I forgive you. So yeah, it resolved fairly easily.
Thank you for clarifying that. So when I was reading the book, there were all these gems buried in it. And one of my favorite moments, maybe my favorite paragraph, was about Marco Polo. Talk to us about that, because I think it said something really meaningful about both the human condition and a writer's life. Yeah,
so there's this children's pool game that you might have played called Marco Polo, where one person closes their eyes in the pool and says, Marco, 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 and the other people have to say, Polo, Polo. And then the Marco person kind of uses their echolocation to tag somebody. And
never heard it described that way before.
Hopefully you've played Marco Polo, so you don't have to go with my description of the game, because I agree I didn't crush it. But at any rate, that's how I think of writing, is that I'm sitting in my basement for years writing some version of Marco, Marco, Marco. And eventually the book comes out, and for the first time I hear someone say back to me, Polo. And it's the loveliest thing. It's the most amazing thing. And it's true for all creative work, really. I mean, on the internet, the Marco Polo happens much faster, right? You say Marco on Instagram and somebody says Polo 3 seconds later or whatever, which I don't find quite as fulfilling, but it still works.
Not on my internet. When I say Marco, more often they're like, but why did you choose Marco? Why wasn't it just Mark? Isn't Marco spelled with a K, not a C?
How can you be talking about Marco at a time like this?
There are so many polos out there that need our help.
Yeah, exactly. What about all the... Yes. You're so right, man. You're right. They don't say polo. That's why I don't like it as much. That's why I like writing books more, is because you have more of a chance to really engage in a deeper conversation, and people hopefully understand why you're saying Marco at the end of it. But I also think it works in the sense, I mean, I write about it in the book in the context of this woman, this young woman named Shreya, who was a big fan of my book, The Fault in Our Stars. And she died of drug-resistant tuberculosis. She died suing her government, trying to get access to that drug I mentioned earlier, bedaquiline. And when she died, she was actually rereading The Fault in Our Stars in the last days of her life. And I often think if I'd become alive to the tuberculosis crisis earlier, if I had heard Shreya's voice crying out, Marco, 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 I might have been able to say polo in a meaningful way, but I didn't hear that voice. And I think about what that says about my information feed. I think about what that says about the privilege that I enjoy in my life, and how I can do a better job of listening to people who are crying out Marco as well as being the person who's saying Marco.
It's such a poignant sentiment. I think it also gives us a little bit of a window into your self-described, sometimes obsessive thoughts.
Yeah.
So you've written extensively about your experience with OCD by now. It comes up in the book, and I hadn't seen the connection until you called it out, that you're writing a book about tuberculosis, and many of your own obsessive fears revolve around disease.
I spend a lot of time thinking about disease, probably more than the average person. Although I would argue, my OCD is deeply irrational and everything, and it has nothing to do with reason or with reality or with the world as it actually is. Like it's a distorted thinking process. But I think it must be related on some level to my fascination with infectious disease and with writing about disease in general. On the other hand, it's always been confusing to me why more people don't write about disease, this thing that kills 90% of us. We spend so much time writing about other things that kill and harm us, like war and divorce and everything, and so little time writing about disease, which is overwhelmingly I think, like both the greatest expression of injustice in the world, because disease tends to follow the paths of injustice that we blaze for it, but also, like, for lack of a better term, it's just super important. Like, it's one thing that we all do. We all get sick. We all break down. We all experience illness. And as Virginia Woolf wrote, like, given the sort of massive changes that occur in a bout of illness, it's strange that it hasn't taken its place alongside love and war as one of the great themes of literature. And so I think I also write about disease because I'm convinced that it's a big deal. I got asked once by Terry Gross that on Fresh Air, like, why I write so much about death. And I was like, Terry, have you not heard? It's coming for us. It's coming for all of us. And I think about it a lot. I worry about it a lot. I'm confused why other people don't worry about it.
I share that confusion. I also, though, I was wondering as I was reading, does diving deep into something that could be an obsessive fear make it better or worse?
It doesn't make it worse. And I don't know that it makes it better either, but it does make it a little different, because when I was only able to write this book because I was well when I was writing it. When I'm really sick, I can't write at all. Like, I can't do anything. And so this is one of the things I find very unconvincing about portrayals of OCD in modern media, that, like, there used to be this television program, Monk, where this detective with OCD was a really good detective because he had OCD. And, like, OCD makes me a real bad detective. Like, the only thing I can detect is my own obsessive and irrational fear. And so I don't know that it makes it better or worse, but I do find it, and I don't know if this is related to having a mental illness or not, but I've always found it easy to get pretty far down the rabbit hole of things I'm interested in.
I think one of the extraordinary things you've done in the past few years is you've made it really clear to people, hey, you can be extremely successful and also struggle with mental illness.
Yeah, serious mental illness, like you can live with really serious mental illness and also have a really good, rich, full life. And I think that's important to understand. I've lived with fairly serious illness for most of my adult life, and yet I also have a really wonderful life. And those things aren't mutually exclusive at all. And, obviously you have to treat your chronic illness like a chronic illness, and there are times when it's disabling and debilitating, and that's very frustrating. And I wish that I could have the kind of, wildly productive life that always seems to me just out of reach. But I have a really wonderful life, and I have a serious mental illness. They're both true at the same time.
I do, every once in a while, when you have a book come out, I do wonder, like, do you have to sign 300,000?
Yeah, probably not. I only signed 100,000 this time, to be fair.
Progress.
Yeah, I'm making a little progress, and my doctor told me this is it. I have some arthritis in my shoulder, and she was like, this is ludicrous, man. Although I signed all of your books right before I came in here, because I was just, it wasn't even really a favor to you. I just didn't have anything else to do, and I don't like having unsigned books in the world. So yeah, I do love signing a book, Adam. But I'm so grateful. I remember when nobody wanted my signature. I remember doing events that would have 2 people come to them, and they would be like, they would be nice and everything, but there would only be 2 of them. I remember one time I did a signing at the Los Angeles Times Book Festival, and these signings are an hour long. And you know that only 2 people are coming. And so you're going to spend 56, 57 minutes just staring into the middle distance, people walking past, aggressively trying not to make eye contact with you, all that stuff. And I remember looking at this 2-person line, and I spent a long time with the first person. And then the second person was the extremely famous mystery novelist Michael Connelly, because the night before I'd told him that I was a big fan of his. And so he showed up to my book signing, which was incredibly generous. And the first thing he said to me, after having to spend 3 minutes waiting in line for a 2-person line, the first thing he said to me was, "Kid, you got to learn how to manage a line." But little did Michael Connelly know that after he left, there was nothing. There was just staring into the middle distance, looking at the darkness. So yeah, I have learned how to manage a line since then.
Love it. So I want to come back to your comment about distorted thinking. What have you learned about how to manage that?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing that I've learned, there's 2 things, right? There's taking my medicine every day, which can be very challenging. I don't know why. I have some clues why it might be challenging for some of us to take medication, but I don't know the full story of it, right? I mean, some of it is because mental illness, like many illnesses, is highly stigmatized, and I'm told by the social order that I shouldn't have to take a pill in order to become my full self or whatever. Some of it's that. But some of it's just that it's hard for me to take my medication. I don't really know why. And so I have to take my medicine every day. I have to set an alarm reminder to take my medicine every day, and then I set up a backup alarm reminder in case I denied the first alarm. I do all the stuff that I need to do in order to take my medicine every day. And then the other stuff is strategies I learned in therapy. So exposure and response prevention therapy is extremely effective at managing OCD, and so I've done that a number of times, because you do it and then eventually a new irrational fear pops up and you've got to do it again. And so that's part of it. But also there's some cognitive behavioral therapy tricks that I use to try to manage it. Like basic stuff when I'm having a panic attack, for instance. I have some strategies to try to lessen the impact of that panic attack. And then when I'm struggling, I've also struggled with major depression in my life, which is really scary and really, really hard to live with, and just one of the hardest things I've ever been through. And I would happily have meningitis again before having a serious episode of depression. It's just a brutal thing to live with. But, when it comes to that stuff, reframing my thinking, being able to tell myself that my fear and despair are reasonable and rational, but at the same time, they don't tell the full story. Of course I'm worried. Life is worrisome, and the world right now especially is worrisome, but that doesn't tell the full story.
John, it seems like there's a growing number of people who are dealing with irrational fears and thoughts right now, only unlike you, they don't realize their beliefs are irrational. And I wonder if you could talk to us about how you think about confronting that. I think a huge impact of Crash Course has been getting people excited about learning in school. And I think you've certainly been a major force for critical thinking. How? What can we take away from what's working about Crash Course?
Well, I think Crash Course works because people want to learn, but they don't want learning to feel like a series of arbitrary hurdles that they're told to jump over in order to get a piece of paper that says they can be an adult, which is sort of how school works some of the time, right? Like especially high school can work that way. And that's not because teachers aren't awesome. It's not because school administrators aren't awesome. It's because the structures of school mix with the teenage brain in ways that maybe aren't that helpful. And so my thought is always, if we can make learning and critical thinking engaging and fun and interesting, then you begin to think, well, this isn't an arbitrary hurdle that's been set in front of me, this learning experience. This is an opportunity to better understand myself, the world around me, to be able to contextualize myself and the universe better. When it comes to trying to help people when they're pretty far down a conspiratorial rabbit hole, and I don't know how to do that. And I have folks like that in my own life, and it's really hard and heartbreaking, and you know, it's easy to get lost out there, and especially in an ocean of information, it's easy to get lost. It's hard to understand how reliable information works. And so, you know, we have a crash course in media literacy. We try to talk about fact-checking, but it's really, really hard. And I think the architecture of the internet makes it harder, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think so too. From reading some of the research on debunking, you know, unfounded conspiracy theories, it seems like a helpful starting point is just to ask people, like, what sources do you consider credible? And what would convince you that your beliefs are wrong? And once you find out what they find persuasive, it's a little bit easier to reach them on their terms.
Right, that's interesting. Well, I'll try to use that with my family.
Try it at your own risk. So while your crash course videos are being gobbled up in schools, at the same time, some of your books are being banned.
Yeah, that's a weird
experience. Which is hilarious.
I agree.
I have to say.
It's it really hurts my feelings. Like, people always ask me, how do you feel about it? And they want me to be like outraged, and I guess I am outraged, but like mostly it just hurts my feelings to be called a pornographer. That's not what I set out to do, and I think that if you read those books that way, it's weird. That's my main feeling, is that it seems weird. It really bugs me. Look, I'm not the hero of that story or the main character of that story. The main character of that story are the teachers and librarians who are daily affected by this collective insanity that's caused lots of school districts to ban lots of books. But it's devastating. I mean, it hurts. It really has hurt the ability of my books to reach people. And that's true for lots of other authors, the vast majority of whom are LGBTQ authors or authors of color. I sometimes feel like I'm thrown in there, so they'll say, look, we're not racist, we also ban John's books.
I guess I have to wonder, it seems to be the case that sometimes book banning is counterproductive, right? It just draws attention to the very book that people are trying to sweep under the rug. Have you experienced that at all?
I think that used to be the case more than it's the case now. I think the chilling effect has actually begun to work fairly well, so that sales of highly banned books, instead of going up like they used to, are now going down. And so I think it's become less of a, because it's so widespread. I mean, my books were removed from thousands of libraries and schools in the last couple of years, and I'm just one author out of many. Now, for whatever reason, the Moms for Liberty, the most ironically named organization in the history of the United States, are especially opposed to one of my novels, Looking for Alaska, because it has this scene where two kids engage in oral sex, but it's like, I mean, if you read the scene, it's wildly unerotic. That's the only way I can think of describing it. There's only 2 adjectives in the entire scene, and I think one of them is nervous. So it's not a pornographic scene. It's meant to contrast with the next scene in the book where 2 characters are just kissing, but they have a much more intimate experience that's described much more with many more adjectives. And that's obvious if you read the novel in context, which is why teenagers who have been reading that book for 20 years are doing just fine now, right? Like, the first generation of kids who read that book are now in their 30s, and they're fine. They're okay. You know, they're scarred and traumatized, but not by Looking for Alaska, right? But instead by the overall circumstances in which they find themselves.
I thought you were going to say it was Twilight.
No, I love Twilight. I will not stand for Twilight slander. Massive fan of Twilight, genuinely, not totally non-ironically fan of Twilight. I think the world building in those novels is incredible. But yeah, Looking for Alaska especially gets banned. But The Fault in Our Stars also gets banned, where I guess two characters have sex, but again, it's barely described. My book Turtles All the Way Down gets banned, even though the main character is afraid of kissing. That's her whole problem, is that she's terrified of and who wouldn't be, of exchanging 80 million microbes with someone in the act of kissing. And so, yeah, it's so hard to fight against, and yet we have to fight against it because we have to stand up for the librarians and teachers who want to be able to teach and curate their libraries in line with their expertise. I mean, we have trained and hired people to do this work, and those people are teachers and librarians, and we just need to trust them to do their jobs.
Bravo. So a bunch of questions that were submitted are about writing. This seems like a good time to ask a few of them. One is that The Fault in Our Stars was a formative book and maybe movie for a lot of people in the room. What would you change, looking back?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I haven't read that book in 15 years. So I don't really remember it that well, to be honest with you.
There are 9 people in the room who are very upset by that answer. I just want you to know. But yeah. you can pass. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, there was also a question. I'm going to paraphrase this one, but 2 people said something to the effect of, "You're a dude, how do you write women so well?"
Oh, that's nice. I have a lot of women in my life who are my first readers. So my editor and publisher, Julie Strauss-Gable, who's been my editor for my entire 22-year career, obviously edits my books, and so she's a very helpful voice. My spouse, who's my first reader, is a very helpful voice in that. But look, writing is always an act of imagining. Writing is always a way of trying to inhabit a different self. And so you're always outside of yourself when you're writing fiction. And you have to be very careful the further outside of yourself that you get. You have to be more and more careful, I think. But it's important to understand that you do have to get outside of yourself to write fiction. And so for me, that's part of the job, I guess. That's part of the responsibility that I have.
Another question that came up is, how do you deal with writer's block when you have it?
Well, my dad always used to tell me that coal miners don't get to get coal miner's block. But I never found that very helpful. So what I find helpful is giving myself permission to be bad, you know, to write poorly, to not know where I'm going. Sometimes, you know, it's okay if I write for a day and nothing makes it into the book. Almost nothing that I write is going to make it into the book, right? Like, I delete 80 or 90% of my first drafts, and so there's no consideration about trying to survive, you know, make sure that every word that goes down on paper is going to survive into the final manuscript. So I just try to give myself permission to suck.
For the aspiring writers in the room, do you have a favorite writing tip?
I think the best apprenticeship we have as writers is reading, right? Like, we get to learn directly from Toni Morrison. We get to learn directly from Shakespeare. Very few careers have that, you know, like where you can learn directly from people who've been doing it for a long time. I used to work as a book reviewer, and I reviewed hundreds and hundreds of books over a 5-year period while I was writing Looking for Alaska. And I almost preferred the bad ones in terms of learning about writing, because then you can see the strings of the puppets moving a little bit more, and you can be like, oh, like that's how you do that. That's how you get a character to walk through a doorway, which I've always found to be the hardest thing in writing, is like getting someone into a room. Because all I want to do, Adam, honestly, when I'm writing fiction, is have two people in a room talking to each other about their problems. I find plots very inconvenient, and I'm not particularly interested in them. I just want to have a chat.
You should have been a psychologist. Miscalling. Speaking of careers, so we got a lot of career questions, and I think some of them are quite timely. So A lot of people are curious about pivots. You've done a lot of career pivots. You went from novelist to vlogger to educator to nonfiction writer and activist now. What have you learned about how to shift gears?
You won't know anything. Like, I didn't know how to write a nonfiction book, but I also didn't know how to write a novel when I first wrote a novel. I didn't know how to be a YouTube educator. That phrase didn't exist when we started making Crash Course. And it's okay not to know anything. It's okay just to start. I think a lot of times we spend so much time in the preparatory phases thinking about how we want to do something, thinking about how we're going to do something and what it might look like and who we might do it with. Just start. Just start and be bad. Like, you go back and watch the first videos that Hank and I made in 2007, they're bad. Like, and I'm not being modest. We've made good videos since then, but not then. Those videos were bad. And about 300 people loved them, but they loved them because they loved us. And so I think just starting sometimes is the hardest thing. Like, it's a cliche to say that the scariest thing for a writer is an empty Word document, but it's true. It's really hard to write the first word. The first word is so much harder than the second word.
I think you might be onto something. The best preparation is action.
Absolutely. That's so much more succinct. God, this guy.
What is the worst career advice you've ever gotten?
Oh, I've gotten so much bad career advice. So many people are told, first off, there are so many different careers. There are so many different jobs. When I got out of college, I thought there were like 3 jobs: doctor, lawyer, and other. And I knew I was going to be an other, but I was like, I guess I'll be a minister. Because like that was one of the others that I'd heard about at least. And so I worked as a student chaplain at a children's hospital, and I was enrolled in divinity school. And then I was like, oh no. And when I was working as a student chaplain at a children's hospital, I realized I'd be a terrible minister. I wasn't a very good chaplain. And so I was like, oh no, this is terrible. The one career available to me has been taken away because I can't be a doctor or a lawyer, and I don't know anything about moving the pile of money around. And so what am I going to do with my life? And I always loved writing, but it didn't seem like a realistic career option to me. It seemed like something like being an astronaut or something, or being a professional athlete, like not something that regular people could do. But the truth is, regular people engage in all kinds of creative work, and they do it in all sorts of different ways, and they may not do it as their entire living. It may be a side hustle, it may be a passion project, it may be something that you choose not to monetize. But regular people do creative work in all sorts of ways, and if there's one thing that you take from listening to me, I hope that it's, if that doofus can do it, why can't I?
It's exactly what I was thinking.
Good. That's my goal. I do, but I really believe that though. Like, I believed novels were written by people who were different, fundamentally different from me, you know? Or that like art was made by people who were fundamentally different from me. And that's just not true. Art is made by everyone. It's made by all kinds of people. And sometimes that art is for an audience of 1, sometimes that art is for an audience of 50 million. But the value for me is in the making of the thing. You have to be able to find value in making the thing. And that's true whether or not it's creative work or a marketing campaign. Because you have to find a little bit of the intrinsic value in doing the work. Because otherwise you become entirely reliant upon exterior feedback, exterior positive, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't matter.
Validation?
Validation. That is good, Adam Grant. That is the exact word that I was looking for. You're looking for external validation. And you have to find some of that within you. Because if you're only looking for external validation, my experience is it will never be enough. There will always be a hole inside of you that all the validation in the world simply cannot fill. Because where that has to come from is within. You have to find meaning in the making of the thing, not just meaning in the way the thing is received.
Well put. I got a text earlier from a super fan of yours who insisted I ask you this question.
Oh, God.
It's related. The question is, John, what is your favorite Hank Green creation?
Oh.
That came from Hank Green.
He knows what I'm going to say. He invented a form of glasses that render three-dimensional movies in a crisp 2 dimensions.
Isn't that backward? Okay.
Yeah, he called me and he was like, hey, I figured out a way to make 3D movies just be in 2D.
Why would you want to do that?
That's what I said. I said, why would you want to do that, Hank? That's the worst idea I've ever heard. People pay extra to go to the 3D movie theater. And why would they see the movie in 2D? And he was like, it's for people who want to go to the movies with their friends, but don't get headaches when they watch 3D movies. And I was like, Hank, your market for this product is 6 people. And the product cannot cost more than $8. So we're looking at a maximum return of like $20. Well, 100,000 copies of 2D glasses later, boy, was I wrong. Turns out there are a lot of people who want to watch 3D movies in 2 dimensions, and Hank is a genius, and I was wrong, and when he asked me for $5,000 in startup capital, I should have provided it.
Team Hank all the way on that one.
Yeah, no, he saw it coming. So, I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite thing that Hank has done, but I always say 2D glasses because it's the most ludicrous thing he's done.
Okay, he did submit a follow-up question that was more serious. Hank says, my real question is, John, if you had to quickly prove to aliens that humanity was worth saving, what would you show them?
I think there's so much I could show them because we're capable of such compassion and generosity, and we're capable of such sacrifice for each other. But I would actually show them a graph. I would show them a graph that begins the year I graduated from high school, 1995, and ends today. And that graph would show the number of children who die every day. And what that graph would show is that the year I graduated from high school, 12 million children died under the age of 5, and last year fewer than 5 million did. And that progress was not inevitable, it was not natural, it did not happen because people were always going to get healthier, or we were always going to make the world safer for children. It happened because millions of people, billions of people, if you count all the taxpayers who participated in that progress, came together and decided to prioritize the lives of children, decided that children's lives should have value. And as a result, we've decreased child mortality by 60% in the year since I graduated from high school. It's an incredible accomplishment. You know, if the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal actually reported the most important news story of the day, every day the headline above the fold would be fewer children died today than any day in the last 6,000 years. And what breaks my heart is that that might not be true for much longer.
Wow, that's really powerful. I have to continue on the Hank thread a little bit here.
Hank is my brother, by the way, in case there's anyone who doesn't know that.
I feel that's been established.
Yeah, he's my little brother, and he's very successful on TikTok. I think it's important for you to know that he's mostly a big deal on TikTok.
Well, strangely enough, this goes to one of the questions I want to ask you, which is, I don't feel envy very often, but when I watch you and Hank collaborate, I think, oh, it would be so cool to have a sibling relationship like that.
It's very special. It's really, really special. I mean, my brother is my closest collaborator. He is my oldest friend. He is, you know, one of the dearest people in my life, and that is such a blessing, and it is so rare. You know, in adulthood, it's very difficult to remain close to your siblings. In fact, Hank and I weren't particularly close. I left for boarding school when my brother was 11. So I never knew him as a teenager. I never knew him as an adult. I always liked him, but I liked him in sort of a distant way, you know, like the way you like your cousins or something. And it was only when we had a project together that we were able to really become close through making YouTube videos together. And now we have many, many projects together, and that's brought us closer and closer and closer together. And it is the joy of my life to be so tight with my brother, and also to have somebody I can trust all the way down, somebody who gets it, somebody who understands like the trials and travails of my life, because it's pretty hard for me to complain about my sweet, sweet life to most people, but I can complain about it to my brother, and he will listen to me. Even when Hank was going through chemotherapy, I remember once I called him and I was like, I had this really annoying work problem, and he was like, I just threw up. And I was like, I know, and like, that's super real. but my problem is also real. And he just gets it, man. He's the most amazing person I've ever known. Like, I really am kind of the tail to Hank Green's comet. That's been my role ever since we started working together, because he's so relentless. He has so much more energy than I do. And being the tail to his comet is a great privilege.
Is there something you can teach us about how to build that kind of relationship?
Make stuff together. You don't have to make it for anybody else. Make pottery together. Have a project where you exchange video blogs once a week. Have a carpentry project together. When you visit each other, do a jigsaw puzzle together. Just make something together.
Okay, so one of my most brilliant collaborators, Marissa Shandell, is here, and she sent me a video that you and Hank did a while back. It was a Vlogbrothers video about motivation, and it shocked me because you talked about how you love motivational quotes.
I do.
I watched that, and I was like, John Green likes motivational quotes? This is just incongruous. Like, you're a deep thinker, and you write about important, complicated things.
Thank you.
And you like these cheesy what is going on here?
The cheesier, the better. You know, like, it's not about how many times you fall, it's about how many times you get up. I'm like, yeah, it is. It is, because it is, Adam. It is about how many times you get up. It's not about how many times you fall. And so I love that cheesy stuff because it's true. It works on me. It works on me because it's real. And so I am deeply inspired by the cheesiest, like, always attributed to Anonymous because nobody is willing to take any credit for having said something so silly. I love it. I love an encouragement.
Maybe you can help me with this, because I see a lot of those quotes and I just roll my eyes and I'm like, first of all, like, where's your randomized controlled experiment to support that? But secondly, like, some of them are just wrong. Like, you know, like, shoot for the moon, and if you miss, you'll still land in the stars. First of all, the moon is closer than any star, so that's wrong.
Vastly closer.
Secondly, like, you'll probably get hit by an asteroid.
Yeah. Well, also, if you shoot for the moon and you land in the stars, it's a catastrophe. You're so far from the moon. You're light years away from the moon.
Also, stars are very uncomfortably hot.
Very hot. You don't want to land amid a star. That's the last thing you'll ever do. Yeah, no, I agree with you. A lot of them don't work for me. But the ones that do work for me. The ones that are technically inaccurate don't work for me. Like, sometimes people ascribe them to me, you know, like, people will say, like, it's, you know, it's like, because I did say in one of my books, In an Abundance of Catherines, what's the point of being alive if you don't at least try to do something remarkable? But that's at the beginning of the book, and then the whole book is about proving that wrong. That, like, there's a point of life to being in an like a so-called ordinary life, because there is no such thing as an ordinary life. Every life is extraordinary because we have this, we are exceptionally rare, right? Like, in the history of the known universe, we're the only thing to ever figure out what's keeping the stars apart or even have any clues about that. We're the only thing to be able to fathom the stars into constellations. We are incredibly rare and precious, and every single one of us is an amazement worthy of all of the care in the world and deserving of loving and being understood. And, like, that's the point of being alive. The point of being alive is not trying to, like, achieve immortality, which doesn't exist. The point of life is to, like, be here with each other in true solidarity and try to ease each other's journeys. And so, like, I spent the rest of that novel trying to prove that quote wrong, and everyone always quotes the quote, and I'm like, no.
Out of context. Very disappointing. I think the first time we met, you told me you think about your books as a gift that you're making for readers. I think one of the interesting features of your life is you have all these different groups of fans, right? Not just readers, but viewers and listeners, and different groups are, I think, drawn to different aspects of your creativity. How do you think about the gift in that multiverse, and, like, what role do these different audiences play in keeping you motivated?
Well, I need intrinsic motivation. I need to want to make the gift even if it's not going to be received, right? Like, because I'm going to write a lot of books that never come out. I'm going to start a lot of things that I never finish. I need to be able to stay focused on making stuff as a gift for people, regardless of whether that gift is received at all or well received or whatever. But to have people say polo to your Marco, to have people respond generously to your work is a real gift. And for me, so I make the gift, and then people give me a gift in return. That's how it feels to me. And the biggest gift they give me is when they bring their deepest selves to something I made. So sometimes someone will tell me, I read your book, Turtles All the Way Down, and it made me think about my own relationship with obsessive thoughts, and that led to me eventually getting diagnosed with OCD. Or someone will read The Fault in Our Stars and tell me, I lost my brother to cancer, and here's how The Fault in Our Stars made me feel in that context. And that means that they brought their unique, particular selves, their deepest selves, to that story in a way that I could never have imagined, in a way that I could never have made the book that for them. They had to make it that for them. And so the magic of creative work for me is that I have to make it as a gift for someone, but then they also have to be generous in order to receive that gift and make the book or the video or whatever it is as good as it might be.
Love that. Okay, lightning round time. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
I feel like a lot of people try to opt out of this, but as a YouTuber, you can handle it.
I love a lightning round.
Excellent. All right, first question. You delete most of your tweets. Why?
I mean, have you been on Twitter? That's the answer. I'm sorry, I thought this was a lightning round, Adam.
It is, but I wanted to hear why. What leads you to abandon the thought you thought was worth sharing?
Oh, the moment that it escapes containment and it starts to get retweeted by people or commented on by people who aren't in my community, I'm like, oh no, I didn't mean that for you.
What's something you've rethought lately?
Oh my God, almost everything. I have rethought my relationship to organizations like USAID, who I've often been critical of, but I also feel very strongly about. But I feel very strongly about their work, and their work has made a huge difference and saved millions of lives. The thing that I probably have thought the most differently about, though, is Liverpool Football Club and our season, because we lost 2 very important games right in a row, and so I deleted a bunch of tweets that were sort of pre-celebrating having the greatest season of all time.
I like how you're still saying we, though.
Yeah. I'm on the pitch, Adam. I'm fighting for every ball with those guys.
This one was from the audience. I'm going to read it verbatim. What's the hardest thing you've ever done, and how do you think that compares to the average person's answer?
It's a great question. It is not a lightning round question. It requires tremendous thought, and I feel like I have to get back to you in 6 weeks. What is the hardest? I mean, quitting smoking was pretty hard, but that's not, no, the hardest, honestly, I've been through some hard stuff that's private. And I think it's probably not as hard as the average person.
All right. What do you think is the biggest impact that AI will have on creative careers?
I don't know. And I think anyone who says they know is not telling the truth.
Agreed.
I don't know. I think that we're at the beginning of a revolution that we don't understand, and we're in the middle of a revolution with the social internet that we also don't understand.
Some people say long form is dead. I say long live long form. What do you say?
I say long live long form. Long form is the future, I think.
Good. That's good news for a lot of us.
But I'm also biased. I write books for a living.
Touché. Someone wants to know, can you tell us again about the time you got interrogated by a CIA intelligence officer?
Well, they weren't with the CIA, for the record. They were with a different intelligence agency. But yes, I'm happy to tell you that story. My emails were hacked by the Russian government. I also don't know why. I also agree with you that I don't seem worthy of that distinction. And a nice fella came and visited me. He was introduced to me by a known friend, and he said that he was in town for the Indy 500, and he sat down next to me. And I said, I'm so excited to have you for the Indy 500. I'd love to have you as my guest for the race. And he said, I won't be staying for the race. And I thought that was a little weird. And then I said, your job title is very funny because it sounds like the exact same job title of a spy in that television show, The Americans. And he did not laugh. And then in the uncomfortable silence that followed, as I was drinking scotch that he had provided to me, I said, so what do you do? And he said, I mostly work in intelligence. And I said, oh. And he said, what do you think about, he asked me a lot of questions, and I answered all of them. I told him how much my mortgage was. I don't know why. He just seemed to ask the questions in a way that made me think that they had to be answered, you know? Like, he wasn't threatening, he wasn't unfriendly, he wasn't intimidating, he just wanted to know how much my mortgage was. And I told him. He wanted to know how much my AFC Wimbledon sponsorship was. I sponsor a fourth-tier English football team. I told him. He wanted to know all kinds of things about me. He wanted to know about my relationship with Vladimir Putin. I said, to my knowledge, I don't have one. He wanted to know how I felt about the Russian government. I came down, and I guess this is controversial these days, I came down hard opposed. And we had a nice drink, and then he left, and I think concluding that I was neither an asset nor a threat.
I had not heard that story.
Yeah, it was a pretty weird experience, Adam. I called my dad afterward, and I was like, was that a spy? And my dad was like, I think so, probably.
To close the lightning round, if you could only have either banana scratch and sniff or Dr. Pepper, what would you choose?
Oh, torture, but Dr. Pepper, it's my daily companion. Dr. Pepper is the greatest achievement in human history. It's the only soda, and I know this is a lightning round, Adam, but I just briefly have to go on a Dr. Pepper rant. It's the only soda that has no natural world analog. It doesn't taste like an orange or like a cola nut or like vanilla or like lemon lime. It tastes like the soda fountain in 1889 in Waco, Texas smelled when Dr. Charles Alderton tried to invent a soda that tasted like the smell of that particular pharmacy. And so every time we drink a Dr. Pepper, we are drinking the smell of an 1889 Waco, Texas pharmacy. That is freaking magic. It is a taste that was designed for your particular taste buds, not from the world, but by a scientist who wanted to delight you. And every time you drink an ice cold Dr. Pepper, and I hope in your life you will drink many of them, and no, I am not sponsored. Every time you drink an ice cold Dr. Pepper, I hope you will think of Dr. Charles Alderton and the gift that he left us.
Are you sure you're not on their payroll?
No, I tried to be, Adam. I had this incredible conversation. I know this is a lightning round, but I had this incredible conversation with the Dr. Pepper Snapple Company. They were like, hey, we know you're a big fan. We'd love to talk to you about a sponsorship. And I came in, I've never come into a meeting so prepared. I had a PowerPoint presentation, and I was like, Dr. Pepper should sponsor humanity's relationship with the moon. And they were like, we were hoping that you would make a TikTok saying that you like Dr. Pepper. And I was like, that's boring, and I do it anyway. You should sponsor humanity's relationship with the moon. And they were like, you can't sponsor a heavenly body. And I'm like, I know, dummies. That's why you should sponsor humanity's relationship with the moon. It didn't go great. They never had a follow-up call.
I mean, with the last couple of stories you shared, I'm starting to question your claim that your life isn't that great.
No, my life is pretty good, man.
All right, John, so two closing questions before we end. One is just coming back to tuberculosis. For those in the room who want to do something about it, where can we begin?
So I think it begins, like you said earlier, we have to try to fill some of these gaps. Nothing can fill the gap that government leaves, but we have to try to fill some of these gaps with organizations like Partners in Health that are doing incredible work on tuberculosis. So if you can support those organizations any way you can. But then the other thing is fighting and scrapping for every dollar of tuberculosis research and response that we can save. And that means talking to people in Congress and in the Senate and asking them to reclaim the power of the purse that is enshrined to them in the Constitution.
Okay, love it. Last question is, this is actually a mashup of two audience questions. Given that you explore so many existential topics, what would you say is the meaning of life, and what is your goal in life?
I think the meaning, thanks for the easy one. Thanks for the softball. I think the meaning of life is to be with each other, to be in community, and to carry each other through everything in life, in sickness and in health, in rich for richer or for poorer, to be in community and to be unalone in everything that we will go through, because we will go through unimaginable loss, and we will go through death ourselves, and to be unalone in that is a gift. And I think that's why we're here. I also think we're here to pay attention. And my goal for my own life is to try to help people pay attention to the stuff that sometimes is easy to forget about, whether that's tuberculosis or the wonder that's all around us. So that's what I see as my little role to play in the job of together forging meaning in life.
Well, you do it magically, John. I cannot think of a time when I've interacted with you or your work and it hasn't made my life better, and I know there are a lot of people in this room who feel that way too. Can't thank you enough.
Thank you. It's a gift to be with y'all.
Woo!
Thank you. Thank y'all so much.